All right, Twitterless Steve Schirmer is here, host of what's the name of your new podcast? You want to subtly introduce it if you haven't already, but thanks for joining me, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I think this is the third or fourth time we have done the majors preview. And yeah, I guess we can probably announce officially what the podcast is. I know when you had Cameron on our show, on your show last week, you definitely went into it. And if
Yeah,
anyone
we
hasn't
we've
figured
done
it out by
enough.
now,
We've done enough teasing. There's no secrets anymore at this point.
no, there isn't. So I believe, although I have to check with my co-host, it's going to be Hold the Green. Obviously, a play on money and holding the green, but a little bit of a golf reference there too. So uh, I think that's what we're going to go with. I know Cameron's on board with it. I'm definitely on board with it. I know my
I'm on
wife
board
is
with
on board.
it.
My wife is
Yeah.
on board with it because she came up with the name, by the way. And so there's going to be problems in the household if we change it at the last minute. So I think we're pot committed at this point. But yes, we will be debuting on Andy's new network in January for Kapalua. I'm very excited. I was thinking about Kapalua today, and just anytime I remember, I watch it, and it just brings good vibes, and just I feel really happy just watching and covering Kapalua. So I'm looking forward to the new season coming up, and not having to digest odds boards where Ben Griffin is the tournament favorite. I don't want to ever see that again.
And just for listeners that may not be familiar with your previous podcast, which was a sports gambling podcast with Boston Capper, how would you guys say you're different than Inside Golf Podcasts? Because we're going to be, I hired you, I hired a couple podcasts. I mean, the goal is to expand the network to make it the most expansive golf gambling and DFS podcast network out there. And you guys were my number one hire. And now I know why I brought you on, but maybe give very briefly, because I know we got our hands full with these two majors, but what can listeners expect in January?
Sure. Well, if anyone was ever a fan of Mike and Mike on ESPN Radio, I think that probably best describes our dynamic. Where, I'm definitely more the analytical type. Obviously, I'm on this show. We're going to dive into the golf courses, the stats. Definitely more the vein, more like an Andy Lack. But Boston Capper, he's kind of a little bit like a reality check for me. He
Yeah.
dives into the stats. He knows a lot about golf. He's been gambling on golf for many, many years too. So he's got all that experience, but he's definitely a good reality check whenever I start going in the weeds about, strokes gain stats and this and that. And he's very good at the eye test. And I think that's very important in golf gambling, where you have all this stats and data, but at the end of the day, like, it's really about if they show up on Saturday and Sunday, and he's excellent at doing that. So we really play off each other, and we're very comfortable doing our show together. We've been doing it for 5 years. We have very good chemistry. I think everybody's really going to look forward and enjoy what we have to bring with the new show.
And you guys are going to also do, because I'm trying to make the shift going forward with Inside Golf Podcast to do more interviews with players, um, cover more architecture stuff, do a little bit more broader golf world at large, talk to some caddies and talk to some agents. And so I wanted to have not that you guys aren't going to do some fun stuff from time to time too. And you guys do your fair share of getting sidetracked as well from time to time. Um, but you guys are going to have two shows a week, right? You'll have and they will be primarily focused on the PGA Tour event at hand, as well as Live. Like, we plan on covering Live. Um, you've had a fair amount of success on Live. We plan on covering Live. We plan on covering DP World Tour, although probably not as much on your podcast. But you guys will do a Sunday night show, which is it's in some ways similar to my Sunday morning show, but basically a look ahead at the odds board and then a betting preview on Tuesday nights, right? Because we have Brian on Monday nights.
Yep. Yeah. So basically, we'll have our Sunday or maybe Saturday preview. Depends on a little bit of our schedules. But yeah, so we'll go through the golf course. I'll fire up Google Earth. I will show holes. I'll show anything that's changed from the previous year. We'll go over things that work there, things that don't work there, types of profiles to look for. Very similar to what you bring to your show. But then on Tuesday, we'll dive into the odds board. We'll go down the betting card, any positionals, outrights, matchups, you name it. It'll mostly be betting focused, but We'll probably maybe dabble a little bit in DFS as well. If we get any listener questions, we'll be live on on YouTube as well, so we can definitely field questions on the fly. Yeah, it's going to be very similar to what you had heard if you're a fan of our show before. But and we're going to bring it just over to the new network.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that we are going to have like the most extensive top-down coverage on a PGA Tour event. I'll release the content schedule in a couple weeks, but as it stands now for every PGA golf tournament, we're planning on having 6 shows, which some might say is overkill. But I don't, because I actually think every single one of the 6 shows is fairly unique in its own way. And some are more DFS focused, some are more course preview focused, some are more betting focused, not to mention a bunch of articles as well if you're into written work too. So uh, we'll tease a bunch more in the upcoming weeks as we get closer to launch. As you know, we do not have a real professional PGA Tour event for the rest of the year. We're recording this Sunday night on December 1st. I'm releasing the episode tomorrow. We do have the Hero World Challenge next week. I don't know if I'm going to bet that. I'm traveling next week. Do you usually bet the Hero?
I mean, I enjoy the Hero. I think it's kind of like a little bit like an all-star event. You don't have to
Yeah.
take it too seriously, but it's a lot of good players. If the wind gets up to, it can be pretty entertaining. We've had some pretty good storylines at the Hero. Everyone remembers the Patrick Reed incident from a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, I think Scotty Scheffler is in the field, and he's been quite the buzzkill with a lot of the outrights. So, we'll see. I'll probably dabble a couple, throw a couple
Yeah.
outrights here or there, but don't take it too seriously. Have some fun with it. It's good to throw on if you're, on Saturday or Sunday if you're just looking for some golf coverage.
Yeah, so I may post some pics in the Discord. I don't know if they'll have me do some written stuff for Golf Digest. But primarily this is a podcast that Steve and I have been doing for 3 years. I usually release it in 2 parts, the week after Thanksgiving and the following week. And it has genuinely become one of my favorite podcasts to record of the year. And I think one that people tend to find really useful. I mean, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, we've been pretty on the money with these, particularly last year with Quail Hollow, or excuse me, with Valhalla. This year's Quail Hollow. Um, I think, and I can do my whole spiel on the futures market because I have some thoughts on the evolving nature of the golf majors futures market and the pros and cons of diving into that. Uh, but I think people find it really valuable to get a head start. And there certainly are some numbers that I look at right now. And I think there's a fairly high chance that that player could be half the price come week of. So essentially what we're going to do, it's going to be 2 parts. This week, we're going to do Augusta National and Quail Hollow, the host of the PGA Championship. My hope is that this one's a little bit shorter because we probably don't need to spend the time on the course breakdown aspect of Augusta that we would on the other 3 major venues this year. But essentially, we are going to break down our thoughts on the golf course, give you guys an early look at each of the 4 major venues. Like I said, we're going to be covering the first 2 majors in part one, and then dive into the odds board a little bit and talk about some of the bets that we are thinking about making, some numbers that we may see some value in now that may move based on what we expect to happen in the beginning part of 2025. Uh, so, anything you want to add before we dive right into Augusta National, Steve? I can't wait to talk about Augusta because you know I went to the Masters last year for the first time ever. You went to the Masters last year as well, and I know now you've been to the Masters multiple times. Um, and I feel like I have an even better understanding of this golf course. Um, I feel like it's a fairly straightforward breakdown, but anything else format wise for the podcast that you want to get off your chest before we dive right into Augusta?
I don't think so. I mean, I was thinking before this podcast, and maybe this is a challenge for you and I because we've now talked about Augusta 3 times together. We'll talk about Quail Hollow, And we see that every single year. And we could talk about maybe what they could possibly do to differentiate it from what they have done in the past. Um, but I think that one's going to be pretty straightforward as well. I think so. I think our challenge between now and, you know, when we get to Augusta or the Quail Hollow, maybe come up with one unique thing that maybe no one is talking about, because everybody knows when we get into Augusta National, you know, you got to do everything really well. Obviously, people talk about you have a really good short game, good at long irons, lag putting. You got to drive it really well. And then at Quail Hollow, it tends to be kind of a bomber paradise. So, you know, maybe that's one thing you and I can maybe focus and work on between now and then to come up with maybe a new angle that maybe people aren't talking about. Because I feel like everything we're going to talk about tonight, it's not really a big secret because we break down Augusta, we've broken down Quail Hollow, we've seen it multiple times. You know, it'll be difficult to maybe come up with a new angle, I feel like, for the audience.
I was thinking about the same thing, Steve, because when I was running through my master's research earlier this week, I was trying to think about what my take is on Augusta. And, you know, the main thing that stood out to me, and this could be a fairly good entry point into our discussion on the Masters, but the number one thing, and I'll maybe pose this as a question to you, and I can give you the evidence of why I think there's a case for this take. But do you think that the Masters at this point in time is the most predictive golf tournament on the PGA Tour?
And the PGA and the entire PGA Tour.
Correct. And when I say predictive, um, there's an element of course history in there. And statistically, Augusta does have the most predictive course history on the PGA Tour. And it's not even particularly close. Like if you look at the data golf page, which has kind of a predictiveness graph for course history, Augusta is Quail Hall is up there for the record, but Augusta is essentially has the most predictive course history on the PGA Tour, almost double the second ranked course, which I want to say is either Quail Hollow or Bay Hill or TPC Scottsdale or Waialae. All of those are in that second tier, and Augusta nearly doubles them. And so, what that essentially means is how much does past performance indicate future success, right? So, essentially, if you've played well at Augusta in the past, you are more likely to play well at Augusta in the future compared to other PGA Tour courses. So, that's what I mean when I say predictive.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about it just as you described that, I would probably say yes. I think a factor also too is the PGA Tour is really dumbing down a lot of their course setups as well, and I think that kind of creates a little more parity across the board, where things that maybe we focused on in the past maybe isn't quite as impactful nowadays. But it feels very formulaic when I come to breaking down Augusta National, and kind of like what I just described earlier, where you got to be good with the long irons. There's a heavy volume of long iron play, and that's not changing. They have lengthened the golf course. They push back tee boxes. It is a very long golf course, especially as you saw last year when you get those west winds, especially on those par fives, and it can play very difficult in that respect. You got to have the good short game. You got to drive it really good. So, and it does seem like, every single year, it's not, you look at the leaderboard and it's not really a big surprise at the end of the day, what the types of players will play well and who has played well. So I probably would agree with that. I think this one is definitely more of a science as far as I know exactly what I'm looking for. I know how to weed guys out from the jump with this place. So yeah, I think in that respect, obviously you have the factor as well, the more times you play it, but I just think how you approach it and the profile of what you're looking for, I think it's very predictive. And I think if you just stay with your couple things that you're looking at for this place, you're probably going to do pretty well on your betting card.
So if you look at the last 5 years, last year we had Scotty Scheffler win at -11 by 4 strokes over Ludwig. Um, and, for what it's worth, I made the case on last December on this podcast based on the trend that is extremely common that we do not necessarily see players repeat at the Masters very often, but it has historically been incredibly common to see great players win here 1 year after winning their first Masters. So I came on here and talked about how there was actually this strong historical precedent for Scotty Scheffler to get a second Masters victory, but did I bet Scotty Scheffler at plus 450 to win the Masters last year? I did not. I actually bet him at that number to win the US Open, which did not go as well for him as the Masters happened to. But you look at last year, Scheffler minus 11 over Ludwig. He was plus 450. And last year was actually the hardest that the Masters has played. Um, Actually, it was right there with 2022. It was pretty
Mhm.
much the same scoring average as 2022. But if you remember, Friday and Saturday were brutally hard. 2023, John Rahm minus 12 by 4 strokes over Phil and Brooks. Rahm was 9-1, played a little bit easier last year. Scoring average was plus 1.01. 2022, you had Scotty Scheffler win by 3 strokes over Rory McIlroy. Scheffler was 16-1 that year. Scoring average was plus 1.86. 2021, Hideki won at minus 10 over Will Zalatoris by 1 stroke. Hideki was a bit of a trend breaker that year. The scoring average was still plus 1. Hideki was 50-1. Then 2020, you have the anomalous COVID year where Dustin Johnson won at minus 20 under par. Um, the course I don't expect will ever play the same way that it did that year in 2020. But at the end of the day, DJ fit a ton of the trends that I'm about to talk about as well. DJ was 9-1. He was playing some of the best golf in the world at that point. So if you look at the last couple of years, Steve, and even dating back 6 years to Tiger Woods, who I know his odds were inflated, but Tiger was 16-1 that year. Like Tiger was playing really good golf. He had won the Zozo in the fall. 5 of the last 6 years, the winner of the Masters has been 16-1 or lower. That is remarkable consistency in terms of one of the best 3 to 5 players in the world in the best form winning the Masters. Um, has the Masters really turned into such an extreme ball striking test that is so nuanced from a course experience standpoint that every year this tournament is essentially comes down to literally just pick the guy who is playing the best golf right now with good course history that didn't win the Masters last year. So eliminate Scotty Scheffler. And essentially, that has been your guy 4 of the last 5 Masters. The guy who is playing the best golf right now with good course history, playing in at least 3 Masters that didn't win last year. I mean, it is quite literally been that simple.
Yeah, I think with the recent changes they've made to Augusta National, especially lengthening a lot of these par fives. That was the one thing I looked at. I looked at some how these par fives have kind of changed over the years. Now that they push back the tee box on 13, they push back tee box on 15. Um, it just seems like it has really maximized how good being a ball striker you are and keeping yourself in relatively pretty good position. Especially. Coming in to some of these greens as well. But
From
uh,
175 yards
yeah,
plus, right? Like I think that is such a key skill separator at
yep,
Augusta. I mean, you have close to 50% of approach shots coming from 175 yards plus. And that even came last year, like from being on the grounds. Last year was pretty firm.
yep.
And you're still going to have a tremendous amount of long irons.
Yeah, and part of it, and I know the last 3 years too. I have a big database of weather history and how that's affects scoring. Last 3 years, 2020, the weather in 2024 and 2022 were relatively uh, pretty similar. You got
Yeah.
big winds coming out of the west. It really, 2022 was a little colder, but in 2023 as well. Remember, it started out kind of relatively benign. It was really warm, but then that cold front came through and it was brutal over the weekend. So
Yeah.
I think just the harder it plays, you're definitely are going to have. And I know the DJ year is definitely more of an anomaly, but he was playing so well at that point. But I think just the the harder it plays, at least the last 3 years, I think it's really just going to promote just the best golfer. And I think we are due for maybe a softer Masters, at least with the weather. I know it's going to be a little bit more of a wetter winter on the East Coast, maybe a little softer. But I'm interested in seeing if we do get maybe a little easier Masters, maybe one kind of like in 2021, where that one was a little more unpredictable. Maybe we do break that trend. So, but if we're going to get kind of same weather conditions that we got last 3 years, where really difficult teetering conditions, really difficult ball striking conditions, just yeah, take the guy who's just playing the best, and that's just what the trend has been. So, it's we're basically going to try and predict tonight, who's going to be playing the best of the elite players coming in. I mean, that's basically going to be my short answer as far as who might pick to win. But yeah, it's really going to depend on all those things.
Well, that's kind of the problem with the Masters futures market because, in my opinion, it has become so dependent on recent form. And I wrote down a lot of these trends um, because I thought some of these um, were pretty fascinating in the sense that they all almost lead you down the same path. But some of the ones that I wrote down, so 11 of the last 12 under the age of 40. Okay, whatever. 12 straight winners, top 30 OWGR, whatever. What does that mean anymore? But again, last couple of years, even if Lev players got OWGR points, they would still be top 30 players, right? 11 of the last 12 winners have finished top 30 in at least one of their last two starts leading into Augusta. Trivia question for you, Steve. Can you name the one player over the last 12 years that didn't finish top 30 in at least one of their last two starts leading into Augusta? It's not who you'd think.
Oh man, was it Schwartzel?
It was
Or is it?
Rom. So I don't know if you
Ah,
remember this, but
yes.
Rom was lighting the world on fire at the early part of the season. He won Riviera that year. He won the American Express, I believe. He won Kapalua. So he won three times. But then he withdrew from the players and finished like T55 at Bay Hill. So people actually kind of hopped off him. I bet him that year. I hit him at 10 to 1. But anyway, uh, that one you can kind of go either way on because Rom clearly there was clearly a huge opportunity on Rom. Rom was clearly playing incredible golf that year. 11 of the last 12 winners have posted a top six in a major in one of the previous two seasons. That's not a huge shock. Eight of the last 11 winners had a top 12 in a stroke play event in one of the last 2 months. That's another recent form one. Eight of the last 11 winners had won or finished top five that season. So, again, all of these are pointing to do not call your shot. Do not bet this futures market unless you are absolutely sure that this player is going to be playing good golf, preferably winning that year or finishing top five that year. Um, the only thing that it really seems like you can quote unquote eliminate uh, guys just really don't go back to back for whatever reason. If you're, hosting the champions dinner, the extra commitments that may have from a media perspective. So in the last 25 years, the only two players that have finished even in the top five the year after winning, can you name them? Two guys that finished top five the
The
year
year after
after
winning.
winning. Yeah. Last
Um,
25 years. You know both these names.
well, you're getting me when I'm sick, so I'm a little clouded right now. Adam Scott one. I know he had a pretty big run between when he won and I think the
Wasn't
early 2010s.
wasn't Adam Scott start with the low-hanging fruit.
Okay. Tiger.
Tiger.
Okay.
Tiger in 2006 and 2007
It's
went back to
25
back.
years, you said?
Yeah, 25 years. So back to
Is it
2000.
is it Spieth?
It's Spieth.
Yeah.
So Spieth in 2016, and then remember in 2017 he almost won, ended up losing to Willett the following year in 2017. Um, Another one that I thought was interesting: don't peak too early. In every single one of the majors the last 10 years, only Phil in 2013 at Muirfield and Rory in 2014 at Valhalla won the week before winning a major. So keep in mind, however, last year Scotty Scheffler missed a 6 foot putt to win the Houston Open in his direct start before the Masters, but he did win the Players and the API in his prior two starts. Nine of the last 11 winners have played in at least three Masters. I know this is something you and I have both harped on, is that the sweet spot to winning the Masters is between your third and 10th appearance, pretty much. So Scheffler won the Masters in his third and fifth Masters appearance. That's essentially the sweet spot. So, Steve, I mean, running through all of these, it's leading me all back in the same direction. Pick the player below 20 to 1 that is playing the best golf in the world, has played in at least three majors and isn't Scotty Scheffler because Scheffler won last year. I say this tongue in cheek because I know it's not that simple, but I mean, that is how it has played out nearly every year. Like statistically, this has become by far the most predictive tournament on tour, and it's not particularly close.
No, it definitely isn't. And I think when we, look at some of the other big names here too, I think we're buying definitely top of market of guys like Xander. Obviously he won two majors last year, really good at Augusta, but you got to figure at some point, he's going to come back down to earth a little bit, just how these guys are. Year to year they change equipment, change clubs because they're, contractually obligated to play different thing, different clubs, even, with the same manufacturer. So, I mean, guys like that, or, the pressure with Rory or, Ludwig, that could be someone who just, it's right in front of us. He ends up just being the best player in the world, but he's 15-1 at this point. Is that really who you want to back? So, but I agree with that. I mean, it's really just, there's not really a lot of value to betting it today. Um, Unless you absolutely think a guy like Ludwig or Hovland, if he finds it, is just going to plummet down to the early teens. But you're right. It's formulaic as far as the profile you pick for who you want to bet the Masters. And it just has been just the best player. So it's really just going to come down to weather, I feel like, at this point, as far as what type of tournament we're going to get. It's a little softer, maybe more of a chance for an outlier. But if it's the last 3 years, it's going to be the same exact thing again. You're right.
Well, I do think there are some guys that we'll talk about that are 40 plus that could see their odds slash in half.
Hmm.
Um, but if you look at the guys, I'm looking at FanDuel right now, Steve. If we talk about the guys that qualify for what we're talking about, currently there's six guys under 20 to 1. I would not, I would expect that number to get hopefully a little bit shorter. This is not a very mature market. You're paying a premium if you want to bet the Masters right now. I would personally not recommend in betting any of these guys under 20 to 1 at this current moment. But we're looking at Scotty Scheffler plus 490, Rory plus 950, Xander 12 to 1, Rom 13 to 1, Ludwig 15 to 1, Colin 18 to 1. And so the guys that actually fit what we're looking for, that fit all of these trends, cross off Scheffler, which is I know a very strange statement to have roll off the tongue, and you obviously can't do that. I'm speaking hypothetically if we're talking about how this tournament has played out over the last 25 years. Of course, Scotty Scheffler can win the Masters back to back. I think you can cross off Rory based on he's played over 10 times, right? I mean, Rory, the Theo Varian window on the Masters might have shifted a little bit with Rory. So, and Ludwig will be playing in a second Masters. And it actually, you don't often see guys win a year after contending or even coming close. I mean, that trend is not as strong as if you won the prior year, but it's not always a guy that had a totally near miss the prior year and then ended up winning the next year. So the three guys under 20 to 1 that really fit that trend. Now, they ultimately are not going to fit this trend if none of them show up in the first part of 2025. I can assume it's a fairly safe bet that every single one of these three players is going to perform well at the beginning of 2025. I don't know if they're going to win, but I think it's a fairly safe call that each three of these players, I think we can comfortably expect to notch a top five in the first 3 months of 2025. Xander, Rom, Colin. And Rom has that year after thing going for him as well. Xander would be winning three majors in his last five starts. That seems like a pretty healthy ask. I don't think my money will be going towards Xander in next year's Masters, but Xander, Rom, Colin are really the three. I mean, Colin is really the one that's going to fit a lot. Colin's playing in his sixth Masters, I believe. He has immaculate course history. I mean, he's really, and I talked about this last year on the December preview about how um, the driving accuracy percentage at Augusta National is one of the highest on tour. I mean, you're playing from the fairway a lot at Augusta National. And if you put Colin Morikawa consistently in the fairway. There is not a better player in the world outside of now Scotty has surpassed him in 2024 in terms of hitting middle to long iron approach shots from the fairway than Colin Morikawa. Um, so Morikawa 18 to 1, Rom 13 to 1, Xander 12 to 1.
Mhm.
Of those three, who has your attention the most? Or would it be somebody that breaks the trend in Scotty, Rory, Ludwig being more likely, in your opinion, than the three former guys I just mentioned?
Well, I think we're definitely on the same wavelength. The two that I had check mark for today, it was Rom and Colin.
Yeah,
Starting with Rom, we have the year after. Last year, you had the transition to live and didn't go all that great. There was the frustrations that he couldn't get over the top. And let's put it this way: if he does not have a top five on live heading into the Masters, something has horribly gone wrong with Rom, given the lack of depth on that league. But I just feel like his profile of player, obviously he's won a Masters, but I feel like that profile, he's going to be a multi green jacket wearer with his length,
agreed.
really good short game. He's historically putt very well at Augusta, great long iron player, drives it awesome. That just feels like, he's still young too. He's not even 30 yet. So he's got a lot of prime years ahead of him to win multiple green jackets. And I feel like, I think this year, now that he finally won a couple times on live, played pretty well on the DP World Tour this fall. Maybe finally he can start to loosen up a little bit. We saw with Kepka too. That first year on live didn't go all that great. And then he ends of the second year, he ends up contending at the Masters, ends up winning the PGA. Maybe we get a similar thing with Rom this year, where the majors did not go great for him last year, other than the Open. Maybe this is the one to where he's going to go. And with Colin, you kind of just nailed it. I remember last year when we were talking, we kind of got into a little bit where when you're talking about your model and you really just wanted to value distance. And I kind of push back on that because you have a guy like Morikawa where you're right. If you just put him in the middle of the fairway, he's the best long iron player on the planet. And one thing that's really encouraging with Morikawa too, and what really surprised me last year, it's like I kind of crossed him off, was he historically is not a very good bad weather player, especially when it gets windy. The ball, he hits that fade, kind of balloons up a little bit. But you were there, I was there. It was so windy at
Yeah.
Augusta National last year, and he played awesome. And now he actually has a couple examples of when historically I would fade Morikawa in really bad weather, in windy weather. He actually rose the occasion. So,
Yeah. I don't
uh,
think you can say that about Morikawa anymore because I used to
no.
think that too, that um, he's delicate. He's a dome golfer. I mean, I specifically remember in that Friday round and Saturday for the most part as well. I can't remember off the top of my head whether it was Friday or Saturday last year that he really rose to the occasion and shot up the leaderboard. I'll never forget Scheffler's Friday round. I think he was playing with Xander and Rory in the first 2 days, and he just completely stepped up to the plate in brutal, brutal conditions. And like
Mm.
he just had all of the shots for those conditions, and someone like Rory did not. Um, but I agree with you. Morikawa has continually impressed me. I want to say there was another tournament last year that had somewhat shaky weather that I remember just thinking to myself, okay, I think we can't really say this about Morikawa anymore. The other thing about Morikawa, and you were probably getting here yourself, his short game has massively improved as well. Like his short game last year was his best short game year of his entire career. And I actually really am starting to trust him around the greens at Augusta as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have very last 50 rounds. He's one of the best players, at least like top 150 around the green. Even like his last 50 strokes game putting, now that's finally turned around for him. And he's his strokes game putting metric at Augusta has been really good there. So now that I have the liberty,
Last 4 years, Steve,
hmm
we've had 4 years of strokes gain data via data golf at the Masters. He's gained in every single category in all of the last 4 years. So
hmm
T18, fifth, 10th, T3. He's gained off the tee every single year. He's gained on approach every single year. He nearly led the field in approach last year. He's gained around the green every single year, and he's gained strokes putting at Augusta National every single year.
hmm yeah, and like the one knock on him is because it's really it's such a long golf course now. You automatically think, okay, it's like Bombers with Augusta, but just look at it like how he is compared to everybody else. I mean, all these guys hit it pretty long now. Like he still hits it what, like 298 average. It's a little below average as far as like all golfers as far as distance. So
Barely.
he hits it plenty long. These guys. So we're not talking about like Kevin Kisner or Russell Henley. As far as his lack of length. So and it doesn't matter anyways because he gains so many strokes off the tee because he hits so many fairways. And like you just said, if you put him in the middle of the fairway, especially the greens are going to be pretty firm. There's not many guys you trust more than Colin Morikawa. So it's those two for sure that I was gravitating towards. And you're right. I made mention to it earlier. I feel like we're buying top of market with Xander. We'll talk about maybe on the next pod, but I was I thought his open win was very surprising, just given who he is as a player and what the weather conditions was. That was very impressive. I know he didn't beat a lot of elite golfers that day, but the way he did it, that was extremely impressive. I'm going to remember that a hell of a lot more than we did at Valhalla. But I mean, he's going to probably fade a little bit this year. I'm looking at Rom and Morikawa for sure, though, early. But like you mentioned, there are a couple guys, 41 plus or around 40, that could warrant some attention if you think they're going to have a really big early season to rise to the leaderboard or the odds board.
So I think we're on the same page as of now about Morikawa and Rom being maybe the most sensible choices if you're looking at the top of the board. Although I can just give you a spoiler alert now. This is not a market I have interest in betting until week of personally, particularly because, and we'll have somebody on site this year. I doubt I'll be able to make it to the Masters this year. My goal is to have somebody at our company at every single major this year. I'm going to try and go to Oakmont and Quail Hollow. Maybe I'll go to the Open next year. Who knows? But my goal is to have somebody on site because you really, I was able to pick up so much from the practice rounds in terms of like Victor Hovland, for example, was somebody that I was fairly high on heading into Masters Week in terms of not necessarily somebody that felt ready to win the tournament, but maybe a low owned DFS play. He hadn't been playing that great golf. And then I watched Victor, on the driving range, and he was hooked up to 18 different launch monitors. And it was just like, okay, this guy is not even remotely ready to win a golf tournament right now, let alone the Masters. Um, and so a lot of this is going to be determined based on those 3 months from January to March, in terms of who's actually has the stones to win this event. But if we're talking about guys 20 plus, that you think have a very decent chance to, based on how the schedule looks at the beginning of 2025, to split their odds, right? To maybe go from 50 to 1 to 25 to 1 or 60 to 1 to 35 to 1. Who stands out to you in terms of the types of players that you actually look at their number as it stands now and you say to yourself, okay, I could actually see this guy playing well to open 2025, and this number actually might be better than what you get week of?
Okay. I mean, starting a little, excuse me, lower than that, because I think he's going to be pretty popular pick for the Masters based on what he did last year. You got Bryson 24 to 1. I can easily see him winning 2 or 3 times on live before the Masters and just cutting his odds like 10 or 12 to 1. One thing I actually, and maybe this is why I want to bring him up, is recall him talking last year after a press conference about how he can't figure out the greens at Augusta when they get really firm and crispy because he can't use his launch monitor on the practice greens. So I noticed that he put, and if you look back at last year, he put extremely well in the opening round because it was a little slower that day. It was a little softer. You got some rains coming in. And then once the golf course really dried out and firmed out, he could not make a putt. So that's something maybe to watch for as far as weather, as far as what those greens are going to be, where he doesn't have the advantage that he has at a couple other venues where he can't, get all in the data there. But that's somebody I expect him maybe cut his odds in half. The one guy I definitely had highlighted though, and I was surprised. I mean, I get maybe not because he didn't really have a great year, but Patrick Cantley's pushing 40 to 1.
I know, Steve. And that was my guy too. And we'll talk about him, but as it stands now, I know we make like to make our early December picks, I think Cantlay is going to win the Masters this
Okay.
year. I think he's going to have a pretty big bounce back year next year. I'm pretty high on Cantlay in 2025.
Yeah.
He's my pick as it stands now to win the Masters.
So
Why
I'm
did he come to mind for you?
well, for one is like it just seems like 2 years ago that we were talking about Patrick Cantlay, top five player, his odds pushing 25, 20 to 1 to win majors. And
By
we're
the
not
way,
all that
I've
far.
bet Patrick Cantlay to win the Masters at 24-1 before. I
Yeah.
think there is a fairly strong chance that Cantlay, I don't know if I would have a lot of faith in betting Cantlay sub 20-1 to win the Masters unless he's like really emerged as one of the best three players in the world at the time. But,
Mm.
Cantlay 40 now, I think there's a very high likelihood that he could go off week of at 24, 25-1.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's so many events that fit him coming in too. I mean, you got Riviera, he could play very well. Maybe
Torrey
show,
Pines,
or Pebble, or yeah,
American Express.
yeah, Amex, or even he's even played pretty well at Bay Hill the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one where he ends up clipping a win or so. I mean, one thing I talked about how surprised I was with Xander winning the Open. I was shocked that Patrick Cantlay contended at the U.S. Open, and not only contended, like hung around too, like all the
Yeah.
way to Sunday on firm and fast, tight lie Bermuda. Like that does not scream Patrick Cantlay conditions to me. And he showed some toughness and moxie and, not wilting on Sunday. He was kind of stuck in neutral, but he hung around. I would expect him to just eject, and he didn't. So, and one thing, we talk about all these trends. One thing I like seeing, especially with first time major winners, is like just get a taste of being up towards the top. And we've been
Yeah.
screaming for Cantlay for years. Get in the mix, and he never seems to do it. And he finally got in the mix. Like he's had backdoor top tens, and even that like top five at Bethpage back in 2019. He was never in the mix.
No, he was
This,
good at that US Open, Steve, and he
yeah,
was highly relevant to the very end. I know everybody is going to remember that as the Bryson Rory duel. And don't get me wrong, Cantlay did not play well enough to go out and win that golf tournament. But you're right, he didn't well. Like if Rory or Bryson had played one or two strokes below their baseline or a little bit poorly, we are talking about Patrick Cantlay as your U.S. Open champion.
yeah, which has been shocking. The one thing about looking at the data here, we talk about Patrick Cantlay, great bent grass putter, has been horrific
Awful.
at Augusta.
That's
I
the
have,
giant red flag for me. Last
yeah,
4 years, Steve, and maybe he did it when he finished ninth in 2019 or 17th in 2020. Last 4 years, Patrick Cantlay has never gained strokes at the Masters. And not only has he not gained strokes or not gained strokes putting at the Masters, and not only has he not gained strokes putting, he's lost over 2 strokes putting each of the last 4 years. And he finished 14th and 22nd the last 2 years. So he actually hit the ball. He's been hitting his irons incredibly well at the
mhm.
Masters the last couple of years, and he still finished top 25 the last 2 years, losing over 2 strokes putting.
Yep. Yeah. So I color condition my Excel spreadsheet here, and there's certain guys that if you're so bad, it throws off the coloring that I have to actually manually put you as really bad. And I had to do that. It was him and Dustin Johnson for whatever reason. Their measured putting performances at Augusta has not been very good. But yeah, I can't pinpoint exactly why. Because you're right. I look at him like, oh man, he's so good tee to green. He kills at this place and he can't hit a putt. I don't know if it's mental. I don't know if it's the fact that maybe he just gets in his own head and maybe it's just maybe the types of greens where I mean you saw it just in person. These are just wild greens. They can't build greens like this anywhere else and get away with it anymore. Maybe something like that. Maybe it irks him, but yeah, I mean, as far as where he is right now, the 40 to 1, that was the one that stood out, especially like who's he around? Like Will Zalatoris is ahead of him in the odds board. I know he's been great at Augusta, but we have absolutely no idea what's really going to go on with him. Tommy Fleetwood is right near him. You really want to back Tommy Fleetwood under 40 to 1. Joaquin Neiman, we all want to see him do well. Like he's got the game for it, but he's never really showed up. he's around Cam Young, Max Homa, Tony Finau. So like,
I don't think Spieth should be. I mean,
no,
Spieth coming off a surgery, I do not think should be lower odds than Patrick Cantlay to win the 2025 Masters.
no, he's only 33 to 1 because his name is Jordan Spieth. He's been awesome at the Masters. But you're right. Who the hell knows what's going to happen come with the wrist injury? I mean, a lot of guys don't come back after the wrist injury. So, we'll see.
The one other guy that I wanted to mention in terms of a player that I think it's very reasonable to believe that their odds could be slashed in half. Justin Thomas is 55 to 1.
Mm.
I do think there's a universe where JT is still a top 10 player, a top 5 player, maybe on this iteration of the watered down PGA Tour. I mean, I think it's very much in play that we could be sitting here Masters Week in a couple months from now and looking at that JT 55 number. I mean, you want to talk about a guy that's had a lot of success at some of the early events in 2025. I mean, JT's been awesome at Kapalua. I mean, JT's been great at Riviera. JT's been great at the players, right? So it's not like the early part. I mean, even you could see him sneaking in there and winning a Honda or whatever it may be. I think there's a fairly high likelihood that JT stock is going to rise. And he does fit a lot of those trends in terms of he's played well at Augusta in the past. He's playing, I want to say, in his eighth Masters or his ninth Masters. Um, I think there's enough reason to believe that the 55 to 1 on Justin Thomas honestly could be cut in half.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you just named it. Like, what? There's definitely a universe where he comes into Kapalua, wins maybe whatever the hell the Honda is called now, racks up a couple wins there and just becomes the guy that is playing the best. And you just, the answer is right in front of your face. I mean, like Tee to Green wise, I mean, remember what, 2 years ago, he was a complete mess. Seemed like Tee to Green. And, last year, actually posting some pretty good numbers. His approach play, at least the last 50 rounds, pretty solid from over 150. One of the best scramblers in the world. It's still the putter that's bugging him, but who's to say maybe he makes a putter change? Maybe he finally finds that magic wand with the putter, and that starts to heat up. And that I mean, given his career and the amount of talent and ceiling that he's had. If you want to bet 55 to 1 on JT, I don't think there really is a lot of downside as far as movement down the odds board. This
Agreed.
probably is his floor because considering there are a lot of favorable events early in the year. So if you want to bet him at 55 to 1 and hope that, he maybe clips off a win, gets down to maybe 30, 35, even maybe under 30, if he's playing extremely well, that's probably somebody I would say, and would fit the mold too. Like even if you throw like Hideki in this, like the last like 5, 6 winners, like these are legends of the game where we have like highlights in our head of things they have done extremely well. Like he's not a fake golfer, so he would fit the mold of just a continued trend of just an elite historical player winning the Masters, and JT would fit that. So that's definitely somebody to maybe target. If you want to bet that today. I don't think that's going to go all that much lower.
I think if you told me you had to make one bet today to win the Masters, that would be the one bet that I would make, would be Justin Thomas 55 to 1. What would it be for you if you had to make one bet today?
It's probably your Cantlay or JT. And honestly, I think it's Cantlay. I think he's going to be, I think people are going to buy into him. I think he's going to show pretty well early in the year. I think he's going to have a bounce back year. And I think that's going to end up being in the low 20s. And I think getting 40 to 1 on like Patrick Cantlay, who finally showed some toughness at a major, that it hits the ball great at Augusta. I think it's probably 40 to 1. I think that number is going to go down.
Gosh, are we usually this aligned, Steve? I feel like
Um,
we're often aligned, but I did not expect you to come in here and validate my Cantlay and JT takes right off the bat. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but here we are. Any other names that you want to mention? Because I want to move on. That's it for me in terms of the names. I mean, I could give you guys that have a decent chance to have their numbers be slashed in half week of. But again, I mean, I think you're getting cute. Like I think that a lot of people look at the futures market and their goal is, okay, I want to be able to tout this 100 to 1 on a guy that's 40 to 1. But if the 40 to 1 bet still loses to 5-1 Scotty DeScheffler, then what did you actually gain, right? And historically, if you bet a guy now at 100-1 and he's 50-1, that guy is still losing to one of the best players in the world. So I'm not going to waste our time giving you the case for why Nick Dunlap at 100-1 could be 40-1 week of the Masters, right? I think the farthest I would go down in terms of guys that could have their numbers sliced in half and also could legitimately be my picks to win tournament week of. I would cap it right there at Cantlay and JT. But anyone else you want to mention before we move on to Quail Hollow?
Yeah, I call them refrigerator bets. Those types of bets look great on the fridge. Just, posted there. You're really proud of it, and then they just always goes to shit on Thursday or Friday. Yeah, I mean, like basically trying to envision. I'm not going to bet these guys, but trying to envision who could end up being kind of like the hot player, the guy who's really trending and like really makes the leap. I mean, Nick Dunlap is probably one name, 100-1, just, hits it a long way, shows some high upside, young player, it's a stretch, but can I see a world where Nick Dunlap just makes the leap early in the year? Yeah, I could see it. Can I see a world where Sahith takes the leap? Possibly. I still think he's a little volatile for my liking, but maybe he goes out and wins Phoenix, early in the year, sees his odds go up. He has some good finishes at the Masters. He's got pop, good scrambler. The long iron play was pretty solid. That could be somebody maybe that ends up making the leap. Maybe even like old man, you're probably going to scoff here, but I mean, Adam Scott was playing pretty good golf towards the end of last year. He still has pop off the tee. I mean, we saw Phil contended at the Masters a couple of years ago. And even if you look back at the Masters he won, Adam Scott beat an aging Angel Cabrera that year. So, Adam Scott still has a little bit of game still left in him. Still hitting the ball relatively good. Still a really good scrambler. Got some pop off the tee. Maybe that's somebody that ends up finding it that week. But other than that, though, that I agree with you. It's really just those two middle guys that we talked about. But honestly, I'd rather just keep my betting card free because I'm going to want to target the guys that are basically the best players that year because that's been the trends and that's what I'll be going with. But if you are absolutely jonesing to try and get some CLV and pick some guys that might show some upside, those are probably the ones that I'm really I'm looking at.
December 1st pick to win the 2025 Masters.
I mean, I think Rom is going to have a huge year.
Okay.
I,
I
I,
do
yeah.
too. I really do too. And I can't decide if I want to pick him to win the Masters or I want to pick him to win like the Open. Why don't you go Rom and I'll go Cantlay?
Okay. I like that.
All right, Steve, let's take a quick break and then dive into Quail Hollow. All right, we are back. Quail Hollow, a course that I have a complicated relationship to. You know what? And you know, what, Steve, I'm actually going to be in Charlotte on Wednesday. I'm just passing through. I'm flying into Charlotte, and then I'm actually driving a lot closer to the Augusta area to check out some courses in the Aiken, South Carolina area. Um, I thought about trying to get on Quail Hollow, but to be honest with you, I don't know what much more I would uncover. To be honest with you, I feel like I have a pretty strong sense of this golf course. I'm actually very interested to talk to you about the difference between the Quail Hollow that we saw in 2017 and the Quail Hollow that we see every year for the Wells Fargo Championship and how the golf course setup could be different when it's being set up from the PGA Tour versus the PGA of America. And there are some very notable changes that I think are worth discussing. Uh, but you, I would imagine, have a pretty complicated, long-standing relationship to Quail Hollow yourself. Uh, Overarching broad thoughts on Quail Hollow, Steve?
I mean, I think it just kind of is what it is. It seems, and
It's
I
it's
guess this is
better
what
than Valhalla. Let's just get out in front of it there. It's a
so it's
better
fun.
golf course than Valhalla.
It is. So it's funny though that when you look at the course fit model, and I know there's a lot of noise in those models for like data golf, but the number one most correlated golf course when you pull Quail out was Valhalla, and I just think
Yeah,
that's
it's
just
it's
hilarious.
the same style of architecture.
Oh, for sure. And I guess where I wanted to start was more just expressing disappointment with the PGA of America as far as the course selections at this point, because we were on a pretty good run of some
We were.
courses. Yeah, like I think Kiowa is one of the best, maybe the best PGA setup you can have. I love that golf course. I
I'm
love the
with
fact
you.
that
And
you're.
that's actually one that I am going to see. I have a
Mhm,
really close friend at Kiowa, and I almost added that in for my trip. I think I'm probably going to go there in May.
mhm,
But yeah, I mean, you know how both of us feel about Oak Hill as well.
mhm.
I mean,
Yep.
and you just like even look at like the golf course rankings, like Oak Hill's a top 40 golf course in America. Kiowa is one of the best public golf courses in America. Both
Mhm.
those golf courses are running circles, Southern Hills as well, which I'm
Yeah.
a massive fan of. I think those three golf courses totally running circles over the last two that we've seen.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we had a 3 year run of really good golf courses. And then last year, Valhalla, which I understand they agreed to Valhalla long ago. That was the old home of the PGA of America. I don't think we're going to see a major again at that venue, but that's where they chose. They have Quail Hollow here now, and they probably chose this venue before the switch to May as well, which we're going to talk about it. The differences between the 2017 PGA that was played in August versus what's going to in May, and how maybe we might just see another Wells Fargo, kind of like what we saw at the 2021 US Open, where we just saw another Farmers Insurance Open, essentially. And then we have
Yeah.
Aronimink next year, which I don't know if you've dove too much into it, but
I'm
Gil
pretty
Hanse
mixed. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm pretty
Gil
mixed.
Hanse redid it, and it was really easy back in the 2019 BMW. I just don't know what else they can do
Yeah.
to really toughen it up. And then we got Frisco, which we'll see what happens with that. So
Frisco
it's
could
just
be
a
spicy. Frisco could be really firm and fast and windy that time of
could be.
year. Agree with you on Aronimik. Aronimik, I believe the last BMW they had there, I want to say won by Keegan.
Hmm.
Keegan won that tournament at like 24 under.
Yeah.
And I know Gil Hanse does a pretty special job of restoring golf courses to fit the modern pro golfer. It's just not a giant piece of property. Like I don't know how much more that you could do to Aronimik to make that tournament be won at 5 under par. It's not a part of the country that is going to get a tremendous amount of wind. So yeah, I'm actually worried about Aronimik having more Valhalla potential in terms of like us potentially seeing another PGA championship one at 20 under. I can't say I have that fear with Quail Hollow. Like I do think at least that Quail Hollow is going to play hard. And the PGA championship in 2017, Steve, was actually the hardest tournament of the year. It was harder than the US Open that year, albeit that was at Erin Hills, where they didn't get any wind. But that PGA played to a scoring average of 0.210, which is really hard. I mean, that's harder than the Masters typically plays. And that's a fairly large difference from the Wells Fargo, which generally plays around a stroke over par. Point, you know, point one to a stroke over par. So when the PGA of America set it up, it was at least a stroke per round harder, which is encouraging.
Hmm. So here's the thing, though, and as people are going to find out, I am quite the agronomy nerd.
As my number one question, are we going to
So
see overseed?
so in 2017, that was in August, that was all Bermuda. And I remember, and the data actually supports it, and kind of how the leaderboard shook out. I mean, Kevin Kisner contended at that 2017 PGA. You really had to be in the fairway that week. That because of how long the golf course is and just how gnarly that Bermuda rough was. Um, that really was one where, yes, distance obviously is a big advantage, but you really had to hit from the fairway that week. And
That was enough just to complement your point here. That year for the 27 PGA Championship, it played 7,500 yards on the scorecard. It played just as long in 2017 as it does every single year for the Wells Fargo. The only difference is that driving distance, even in a 7 year distance difference between 2024 and 2017, driving distance in 2017 was 290 yards, 10 yards less than we see at an average Wells Fargo this year. So we actually saw, and Steve, I don't know if you picked this up, but we had like 43% of approach shots coming from 200 yards plus at the 27 PGA. So this golf course if you could distill it to one thing in 2017, I mean, this was the most stark long iron approach test of maybe the last 10 years. Like it is so rare for us to see a golf course where you have over 40% of approach shots coming from 200 yards plus. And that's why Quail Hollow played so hard is you're right. You'd Bermuda from head to toe. You'd thicker Bermuda rough than you typically see at the Wells Fargo. And in 2017, they were hitting the ball shorter and the golf course was just as long as it is today. So you just got this golf course where it was long iron city. I mean, just really long par fours left and right.
Mhm. By the way, I hate to do this. Can you make a cut in the podcast right now? My battery, I forgot to plug in my battery, so it's gonna die.
Oh, the your computer?
Yes, so I
Yeah, do
plugged
you want
that
me to
in.
pause it?
Yeah, pause it real quick. We'll edit that out, and then we'll continue that point
Yeah,
about the
no
long
problem.
irons.
I'll
So
pause
I
right
have a
now.
point on the long irons. Okay, all
Okay.
right. Yeah, I mean, looking at the approach shot distribution chart, it is pretty unreal as far as just how long that golf course play. Like you're right. I mean, it's what 39, 49. Yeah, like, over 60% is over 175, 200 and with, being in summer with the Bermuda, I can't remember if it was like if there was a ton of rain coming in, but I mean, just looking at the driver accuracy rates, it was very bouncy and it played pretty narrow too. So, you really had to play from the fairway, and that's why you ended up getting Kevin Kisner contending. That's why Francesco Molinari was up there. Louis or even like a Patrick Reed, like a lot of guys at like the last three, four, five PGAs, definitely the stereotype of like bomber city, and this one definitely wasn't. So you might be fooled into thinking, oh, well, PGA sets it up where accuracy matters. And I really think that is just the byproduct of the Bermuda. And now we're going to move it to May. And it's only a week after when they traditionally play the Wells Fargo. I can't imagine the PGA would actually want to take the risk being able to get healthy Bermuda.
It's
Because
got to
if
be
you,
overseeded. They have
it's
to
going to be.
overseed it. And
Mhm.
I will have some contacts in the southeast that I can confirm on this, but for all intents and purposes, you have to believe that this is going to be overseeded with ryegrass.
Yep, 100%. Even the Kiowa, they had to oversee the rough there because it's Bermuda rough. So the one thing is, I guess you can look at the Wells. It's basically going to be same time of year as when the Wells Fargo is played, about the same yardage. So what can they actually change? Well, they can probably narrow it a little bit. I did notice back to the Google Earth, they did narrow. You know how everybody cuts the corner on one,
Hmm.
and the farther you hit it actually is pretty wide. They did bring in the fairways a little bit. There is some opportunity to bring in the mowing lines a little bit to make it a little more narrow. They could do that. Obviously, you can make it the greens a little faster. Last year, one of the changes they made, they softened the greens a little bit to get some faster green speeds. I would imagine that's an anticipation of the PGA to get those greens run a little faster and probably grow up the rough. And you're running too big of a risk if you just want to make it all Bermuda to get thick rough if you don't overseed it. It's going to be your 4-inch ryegrass rough. And at that point, then it's just going to be a Wells Fargo that we
Bombs
probably have
away.
seen every single year. But now instead of 2-inch rough, it's now 4-inch rough. And what have we just seen over and over? Long golf courses that are relatively narrow with thick rough,
Yeah,
bombs away.
it's just a
It's
harder version of Valhalla. And that's the
mhm.
thing. Like, so in 2017, driving distance was 291.3, driving accuracy was 58.6. Um, so in terms of strategy off the tee, it was pretty homogenous. It kind of ranked middle of the pack to slightly harder in driving accuracy that year. And it featured the 19th most narrow fairways out of 37 courses. And the only big change between 2017 and how the PGA Tour sets it up for the Wells Fargo is the missed fairway penalty. The rough was a lot hairier. It ranked in 2017, it ranked fourth that year in missed fairway penalty and sixth in rough penalty. And normally for a regular Wells Fargo, it ranks middle of the pack in this category, and the rough is typically down. So I do think that we will see thicker rough, but as long as it's thicker rough that's overseeded, it's going to be a lot like Valhalla and as we see typically for the Wells Fargo, I mean, it really is not that much of a total driving test. I mean, if you look at the numbers for a typical Wells Fargo, it skews far more distance over accuracy. And based on a lot of the numbers that I'm looking at, I actually wouldn't favor total driving all that much at an overseeded Quail Hollow. I would place a lot of emphasis on long iron play and putting, which is how you won at Valhalla, right?
Yeah, basically, I think another thing too is we're going to talk about the missed fairway penalty. And last year, so the green regulation rate plummeted at the Wells Fargo last year, and it was because they resurfaced all the greens. They were all very firm. I think that was a big reason why the green regulation rate was as low as what it was, because it was just hard old greens. Typically, when you resurface greens and just build new greens, it takes about 2 years to really
Yeah.
kind of soften them up.
Like we
So
saw it with Colonial, new greens are always going to be a lot more bouncy. It takes some time to settle.
yeah, so you can probably imagine too that there's not going to be a lot of play. I mean, there's really going to be no play at the golf course coming out of winter, and they're not going to have anybody play it before the PGA. So they're probably going to be pretty firm to begin with. So as far as the missed penalty, if it's going to be low green regulation rate, even from the fairway, kind of like with last year's Wells Fargo, what is the penalty really hitting in the rough if it's going to be difficult to hit, greens anyway? So distance, long iron play, putting, like yeah,
Short
again,
game.
yeah, short
Yeah.
get, yeah, just But I think people are going to look, and I hope they do. We talked about it a couple of years ago with Oak Hill, where we were hoping people would just look at that 2013 PGA and be like, oh well, I watch accurate guys, Duffners, Furyks, and all that stuff. And I hope people look at this 2017 PGA and be like, oh, well, wait a minute, this wasn't really the prototypical Wells Fargo that we typically see. I really think it's just going to be a more difficult version of the tournament we see every single year. And with maybe some subtle changes that probably just promote just more distance. So it's probably going to be another PGA where if you look at just how strokes gain is formulated, just big skewing in favor of distance, big skewing in favor of iron play, tee to green play, lack of as much emphasis as far as in tournament, how to separate yourself with putting, but just overall though, just it's probably going to be the same exact type of PGA we have seen for the past 4 or 5 years, at least, as far as the type of subs and the type of guys that have done well. Only we've seen this golf course plenty of times. We actually have a wealth of course history to go off of with some of these guys too that might end up just maximizing what they do best. So it's disappointing that we're going to get this venue that we've seen so much that I don't expect a ton different than what we usually see. But I am hoping that people look at that 2017 PGA and just get led astray because it's different agronomy. It's going to play completely different.
Yeah, well, you nailed it with the agronomy. The agronomy is the key differentiator here of why we both believe that this is going to play similar to a Wells Fargo championship than the 2017 PGA that we saw at Valhalla. Is that massive, massive difference between pure Bermuda and the overseed? I mean, I actually think that like course history, for example, at Quail Hollow. It's not quite Augusta, but it does feature amongst the strongest course history on tour. But it's kind of in that Bay Hill, TPC San Antonio, TPC Scottsdale, TPC Summerlin, Riviera, Waialae in terms of the most predictive on tour. And you look at the names of the players that I'll give you the top 10 that I think presumably we will see in the 2025 field. Rory McIlroy, 50 rounds. He's gaining over almost 3 strokes per round to the field from true strokes gained. I mean, Rory's uh, Rory's course history at Quail Hollow is amongst the strongest of amongst the strongest marriages of any player and a golf course in the modern era. Then you have Jason Day, Phil Mickelson, Justin Thomas, Bryson DeChambeau, Ricky Fowler, Tiger Woods, Xander Schauffele, Joel Damon, Victor Hovland, Patrick Reed. So you look at those names and I mean, the skill set is not entirely dissimilar from Augusta. I mean, a lot of those names are guys that play incredibly well at Augusta. I mean, your Rorys, your Jason Days, your Phils, your JTs, even your Rickies, Tiger, Xander, Patrick Reed is another guy, and he finished quite well at the 27 PGA under different agronomy, but then has also played well at a regular Wells Fargo championship. Remember, they made that change. They started overseeding wells in 2018, I believe, right? Or was it even more recently?
I think they've been
I
doing it
They've been doing it at
for,
least the last 3 or 4
I
years.
think you have to, because if it's
Yeah.
in May, I mean, just Bermuda just isn't up as
Yeah.
much. So I
Yeah.
feel unless it was held at a different type of year, yeah, I mean, it probably
So
has always been
so it's it's
overseeded.
it's really that same big, brawny, long irons and driving distance, like a harder version of Valhalla, an overseeded version of Oak Hill, an overseeded version of Bay Hill. Um, Congaree in the southeast was another one that I thought of in terms of Congaree is a Tom Fazio golf course. This golf course was renovated and restored by Tom Fazio in 2016. I think I believe I'm playing Congaree on Saturday, so I can give you an update on I Congaree, I believe, gets overseeded that time of year, but then maybe when I'm going to play it on Saturday, I don't know what the agronomy will be. But those are both two Tom Fazio golf courses in the Southeast that, what do you know? Rory McIlroy has played really well at. Tommy Fleetwood, who's also played really well at Quail Hollow and both Congaree as well. But like, that's essentially what we're looking for, right? That big, brawny PGA setup, distance, long irons, short game, mainly because you're going to have a low greens and regulation percentage. But this is really like a pure long iron test, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you just talked about Bay Hill, by the way. So Bay Hill, I can only think of one year where they didn't do this, but Bay Hill actually oversees the rough.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when they resurfaced the greens at Quail Hollow, they made a Tiff Eagle. Now, I think there is going to be a little bit of a question if they will oversee the greens, because Tiff Eagle is a strain of Bermuda that you can get away with having it be okay in colder temperatures. So that remains to be seen, but just tee to green, though, it will be overseeded rye, fairways, rough. And actually, if they don't overseed the greens, then it actually will have the exact same agronomy as Bay Hill, because Bay Hill also has Tip Eagle greens too. So, you know, we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I mean, like, it's you think of all the recent, like the classic PGA venues of just long, narrow, thick, rough, driver heavy, not a ton of
Very
nuance and
homogenous
thought.
strategy. Like
Yeah.
there's not a lot of holes on this golf course where you're not incentivized to hit driver, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
yeah, I mean, like you think about on 16 last year, Rory hit it right over the bunker. That I mean, they moved out what? It was 5:30, I think they played it last year in the final round, and he cleared it easily. I mean, it's just there's so many holes where if you can carry it 305, 310, you take a lot. Not only can you shorten the hole by hitting over dog legs, you take a lot of these bunkers out of play that just it's just not how the golf course is designed. So there's really only a very select few that I feel like can actually win this PGA. I think it's no surprise that like you think of like the types of guys who've done the best at PGAs, like Brooks Koepka, just that type of golfer. Like just pick those types for
Rory.
this week. Yeah. All right. So we should probably actually, I was thinking about this. Can we make a rule?
Let's transition into that.
Okay. Can we make a rule? You can't pick Rory on the
Well,
pod
yeah, I mean, here's the
because we're not
thing.
helping anybody.
I agree. I agree. And you know my relationship to, I mean, all listeners know my relationship to Rory McIlroy. And I kind of had my final stand with Rory at the Masters last year, where Rory and I kind of went on a journey together that eventually resulted in the closure that I needed. Where, I watched him play one of the best 9 holes that I've ever seen in my life, from a professional. And I've been going to golf tournaments for a really long time. And then, he stepped onto that first tee at Augusta. I was standing right there with my dad. next to the fairway bunker on one on the right. And it was like I was watching a different person. The strut in his step was gone. It looked like he'd been body snatched from the most confident player on property to just another guy. Um, my counter to why I should be allowed to pick him at Quail Hollow is that basically just gave me the Augusta boogeyman corollary where I'm done with him at Augusta. But what's the excuse, right? I mean, this is the best golf course that he has played in his professional career
Mhm.
by a landslide. I mean, it's not particularly close. Now, again, the counter argument to that is we've tended to see Rory's best performances at major championships come at the golf courses that are less obvious, right? That he doesn't have some intrinsic connection to, right? Like if you think about the golf courses that Rory McIlroy has a lot of history at, Augusta, that's in its own category, right? But your Valhalla is where he's won before. Your Royal Liverpool is where he's won before. Your Oak Hill is where, I use his locker every time I go to Oak Hill. He, met his wife there, whatever. Um, the ones he's almost winning are Pinehurst and LACC, where for all intents and purposes, he doesn't have some deep intrinsic historical or emotional connection to. The ones that he should win, the ones that he has zero excuse to not contend, are typically not the ones that he's contending at. So that alone is like the number one unquantifiable reason to not play Rory. The because quantifiably, if you look at the skill set and the course history, this golf course was built for Rory McIlroy.
I mean, for God's sakes, he hit it what, like 330 over the bunker on 16. Like I just said, like, yes, it is absolutely built for a guy that can take aggressive lines off the tee, hit it long and straight, shorten up the golf course tremendously. But you're right. I mean, that's a
He's
great
really
point.
comfortable on these greens too, Steve. Like he's
He
gained
is.
like 10 strokes putting on these greens before as well. He really, really loves these greens.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, now it's Tiff Eagle greens, but then he won last year, so I mean, it kind of
He won he
shoots that
won
narrative.
he won last year and
I know,
wasn't
I know.
2021 Tiff Eagle as well.
No, so last year was the first year was Tiff Eagle.
Yeah. So
So
he's won 4 times here.
right. But I mean, listen, that's a great point you mentioned as far as like familiarity to like the major venues. Like I feel like we had been down this block as far as all right, Rory's going to Oak Hill, honorary member. Yeah, he played all right that week, but didn't all that great. All right, Rory's going to Royal Portrush, Northern Ireland. Let's go. Hooks it immediately out of bounds, the first tee, out of it immediately. Rory goes to Valhalla. Not all that great. Rory goes to Kiowa. Not all that great. So
Liverpool.
yeah,
Yeah.
Liverpool. So you know, I just feel like I don't know. Maybe it will get to a point where like Rory just becomes so mainstream and popular that he ends up just becoming contrarian because everybody just thinks it's too obvious.
I mean,
But
that's happened in the past couple of major championships to a certain extent. Like Rory has kind of settled into this zone in major championships where you're either done with him or you're never going to be done with him. There's very little in between at this point where it's like the people that don't believe that he can win a major championship and are not interested in betting him at his current numbers and based on the course history, I mean he's plus 850 now. That feels like the price. I mean, he's not going to go that much lower. And I guess he could go a little bit higher, but plus 850 is already quite low for even Rory at a major championship. And even with the course history, he would need to play demonstrably better than Scotty Scheffler to be the tournament favorite, don't you think?
well, I was gonna say too, there is no universe I see where Rory goes below 12 to 1. I mean, not only just because of his play,
Agreed.
but like even if he just is playing just kind of booning around dog shit.
Well,
Like people are gonna say,
he was playing quite poorly heading into Oak Hill, and he went off at like 13 to 1.
right. It's Rory McIlroy, Quail Hollow. He will never ever be that low. So really, it just you're looking at the odds today. They're 9 to 1 on fan or 850, 9 to 1 on what about there. Like you're basically saying, all right, am I going to single bullet already Rory McIlroy today? No,
No.
and that's going to be your decision in May. Are you going to single bullet Rory? Maybe add like 100 to 1 guy if you like that, but you're right. He's so polarizing that it comes down to: do you think Rory McIlroy is going to finally win another major, win in a place that he has a lot of familiarity with, but has had trouble with those types of venues? So, and that is going to be probably like unanimous, like any mainstream media pick that week. Like when you go to like pgtour.com, like the list of winners, it's all going to be Rory. When you go to like, I don't know, the Golf Channel picks, Rory, 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 Rory. Like you're going to go with that narrative. You're going to go with, with them. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, there has just as a diehard Rory fan, I mean, the resistance is strong. I mean, there are a lot of people that are just like done with this bullshit. So I do think I mean, it's been a decade. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So Rory will always have an underdog element to him just because he hasn't won a major championship in 10 years and he's on the wrong side of 35. But I agree to you. Rory is what he is, and you either believe that he can do it or you don't. And I think what it just comes down to is I'm in the camp that I think he will win another major championship before his career ends. And this one may make the most sense on paper from a course fit standpoint. This might be his best opportunity going forward. Do you really want to invest your entire betting exposure on him? Because I've done that before and it could end in a pretty short week for you. So I don't know. I don't know, Steve. On December 1st, he won't be my pick.
Okay.
But there are stronger men than I out there. Um, so we'll see how I feel. I would say this is a more appealing futures market than the Masters. Um,
100%.
this doesn't have as strong trend lines. We have a really good sense of Quail Hollow statistically, so I don't expect there's going to be a ton that I'm going to uncover between now and tournament week. Again, there's always stuff that pops up. I'm going to make an effort to try and go to this major, or we will at least have somebody at the company that is there for the practice rounds because I do think that you can pick up a lot in the practice rounds. I certainly picked up a ton from the practice rounds this major season, both talking to folks at Pinehurst, for example, listening to folks on the grounds. I changed my breakdown of Pinehurst quite a bit tournament week. And then obviously being at Augusta just helped me get a really good sense of who was locked in that week and who wasn't. But as the futures market stands now, Steve, I think you could probably make a better case than we were able to at Augusta that there actually are some numbers where you could see some value. So who catches your eye?
Okay. I mean, going towards the top here, and maybe this is just my official pick. We talk about just how I feel like bombers are going to have a big advantage. We talked about how this could have the exact same agronomy as Bay Hill. Look at some of the other comp courses at this place. This guy's had
Bryson.
a lot of success. Yeah, Bryson.
24
Uh,
to 1's a pretty good number too.
it's a very good number. And actually, his PGA history is extremely good. And remember, he contended at TPC Harding Park. And I mean, that maybe this is kind of what that ends up becoming more just like if they decide, okay, well, we got to protect this golf course. We're going to make it really narrow and grow up the rough. And that really just was Harding Park. And I know
By the way,
Morikawa
he's such
won
a
that
good putter
week.
that he could win if this PGA is won at 15 under par, like Bryson almost won at Valhalla.
Right.
Bryson's one of the best putters in the world as well.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and like we just talked about with Augusta, he couldn't use his launch monitor for the greens. He could use that here, so he has that advantage. And I mean, great PGA player. In the mix at Kiowa, did not have a good Sunday in the mix at Harding Park. Did great at Oak Hill, did great at Valhalla. So it just seems like if this is going to be this brawny power test that the PGA seems like it wants every single year, and it's coming to a golf course that is really going to promote that. I mean, Bryson 24-1. I can definitely, we talked about that. We're talking about guys who could move up. If Bryson wins one or two times before the Masters, before this tournament, he's definitely gonna be in the teens. So this could be theoretically his low point or his low point in the Oscars before he starts rising up a little bit. So um, there's going to be probably a handful of guys. Like there's some guys 40, 55-1 that I like that I could probably spin myself into winning. But like at the end of the day, it's probably going to be like three or four or five guys that actually can win this thing based on how it's going to set up. And Bryson's one of those guys. So getting that guy at 24-1 and a two in front of him, I really like that.
I was surprised to see the number as well. And I think both of us touched on it, but I think that's one of the best pro cases for Bryson is that I think Bryson has just as good of a chance to win this tournament at 15 under than he does at 5 under, right? I mean, even if we see um, you know, a bit of a zigzag in the sense of there's somewhat of an overcorrection this year where the PGA of America says to themselves, okay, we kind of had egg on our face a little bit at Valhalla. Let's actually make an effort to really protect par this year. I mean, we saw Bryson on a golf course with very narrow fairways and very thick rough at Winged Foot be the only guy to shoot under par at that golf course and win that tournament at 5 under par when everybody else shot even par better. And what characterized Winged Foot as well was not just the narrow fairways and the bomber heavy approach, but Quail Hollow is going to have really fast greens, right? And Quail Hollow has tough greens. I mean, it ranks amongst the top 5 to 10 courses in putting difficulty every single year. That's not necessarily because the greens are designed in a very nuanced way and there's a ton of internal slope and contouring, although I do like what they've done with some of the greens over the past couple of years. But the greens at Quill Hollow are just incredibly fast, and Bryson's an incredibly strong fast green putter. Like he has had so much success on fast greens over the course of his career, whether they be fast bent grass greens at Winged Foot, or whether they be lightning fast Bermuda greens at Bay Hill. Actually, if you look at the last two times that Bryson's played Quail Hollow in 2018 and 2021, he finished fourth in 2018 and ninth in 2021. In both those instances, he gained over 5 strokes putting. So he almost did it exclusive. He actually didn't hit the ball that amazing from tee to green. He putted tremendously well at Quail Hollow in the past. So I'm kind of with you. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to pick Bryson to win a major this year. Um, but if he does, you got to imagine that it's Quail Hollow or Oakmont. And you got to think that of all of the players 30 and below, Bryson by far has the highest likelihood to go off at half that price. I mean, is anyone blanking if Bryson contends at the Masters, wins once or twice on Live, puts out a couple of YouTube videos, and he's the third favorite after Scheffler and Rory?
Definitely not. He'll get a ton of steam if that happens.
Yeah.
And it's very likely that, I mean, not, I shouldn't say likely, but there is absolutely a universe where that could play out. Maybe not Augusta, because I still think what he did last year, he was mostly in the first round. He kind of flatlined a little bit after that. I remember following him on Saturday. He definitely, if it wasn't for holding out on 18 for Eagle, like he was plenty out of it. But I mean, winning on Live, a couple times, obviously with his PGA history and what people are going to talk about this golf course, yeah, I could absolutely see
He doesn't have to
him
do
being
much
like,
because he
no.
already has a betting bandwagon.
Yep.
So you're already going to get Bryson supporters. And I mean, I think that, at the US Open, what was Bryson at the US Open? He's 20-1, right?
hmm Yeah, around there.
I think that's what he should be at major championships. Like, I think Bryson north of 20-1, unless it's the Open Championship where there's still some question marks, you're not going to see any arguments from me from betting Bryson at over, honestly, 18-1 on a golf course that emphasizes distance and long iron play. Um, Who else for you? I'm on the same page with you.
So
Bryson. I circled Bryson right off the bat.
yeah, I mean, look, I'm a Brooks guy, and I'm not saying to bet him. I'm not betting him right now, but that's another guy where he wins once on live, or he wins, relatively close to Quail Hollow, and given his success at the PGA, like, yeah, that's another guy that
Yeah,
would end up having
not to
odds.
step on
Yeah.
Oakmont too much, but I just like Oakmont a lot more because
Mhm.
I'm worried he will think this golf course is kind of dumb. Like
Yeah, but he won Bellerive.
he did win Bellerive. You're right, you're right, and um, I at Valhalla, as soon as that became a 20 under par tournament, I knew that Brooks was cooked,
Mhm.
and this does I do not expect that we will see anything close to 20 under this year. It's just so much harder of a golf course than Valhalla, and I do think we will see a bit of a rebound effect in terms of setup by the
Mhm.
PGA of America in terms of scoring. I still think that Oakmont is going to hold his attention a little bit more, and I
Yeah.
still think that Oakmont is going to be more less homogeneity in terms of strategy. Like I think that Brooks's game plan is going to go a little bit farther at Oakmont. There's going to be far more thought required into a conservative approach at Oakmont than there will be at Quail Hollow, where I don't really think that you need much strategy at all. It's just purely execution.
No, I would agree with that. It just, based on just his PGA history, I could see that he wins once, everyone's going to want to bet Brooks. So that's another, and he's sitting around like 30 to 1, 20 to 1 right now. That's somebody who could dip below 20 if he wins once and gets a little steam behind him. The Hovland one,
We are
it's
so on the same
the
page this year because that's the other
yeah,
guy I circled.
yeah, the number right now, based on how he has been playing, does not justify it. But can I see him coming out, fixing the short game? Because look at it, like, look at his profile, last 50 rounds or so. Ball striking really is fine with him. The
Yeah.
iron play is relatively fine. Driving is still pretty good. He's lost a little bit of distance off that. He was still driving and gaining a lot of distance. It's that short game that still has gone to hell again. But he had those same issues going into Valhalla last year.
Yeah, short game's
Still
going to matter more
contended.
here than Valhalla.
Okay, so but is there a world where maybe he gets back with his old coach and maybe he goes back to his old way and kind of fixes it a
Yeah.
little bit?
I'm with you.
That could happen.
Steve, you're going to learn so much from Hovland by watching him the week of, you
Mhm.
know. Um, so I just need to see how many launch monitors he's hooked up to the week of the PGA. But I am 1000% with you from a course. First of all, I think Hovland's going to have a huge rebound year. I think that both Victor Hovland and Patrick Cantlay are going to have fairly big bounce back years, and both of those guys are going to re-announce themselves as top 7 players in the world. I mean, they're not that much farther than that down, even in off years. I still think we think of both of them as top 15 guys in the world, but I do think that Hovland and Cantlay are going to have much better years than they did in 2024. And I think if you're looking at the most sensible major for Victor Hovland to win, in my opinion, if you're picking Victor Hovland to win a major in 2025, you should probably pick him at Quail Hollow.
I would agree. I mean, it definitely. I mean, obviously, he's been done very well. Quail Hollow, great long iron player. At his, I also expect a rebound out of him too. If that short game does ends up improving a little bit, yeah. I mean, like, not only will he probably clip off a win before this, um, he'll be back to everyone to bet. I mean, like, what were people betting him last year? Like, I think a producer thought he was getting a great number at like 16 to 1
Yeah,
on Hobbin with the PGA. Like,
he even got bet at the Open Championship last year at
yeah.
20 to 1. So yeah,
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean,
24 is not bad. It's not bad.
it's not bad based on what he's been doing. Like if this is the same, if we're gonna get a repeat, kind of like how like JT had the really bad year, and then he was better last year, but it was more kind of a lot of the same types of results. Like if we get another year like that, yeah, like you shouldn't be betting Hovland 24 to 1. But if you are just forecasting out, this is going to be a guy that's going to get back to being a top 5, top 3 golfer in the world. Yeah, you're getting a steal right now, 24 to 1.
Well, remember my picks on the December preview last year at Valhalla were Bryson and Hovland,
Mhm.
and I waited and I bet I bet Hovland the week of at 45 to 1.
Yeah.
So he will balloon if he's playing poorly. I just think there's such a low likelihood that he is going to have a start to his 2025 the same way that he did to 2024. I think it's very much in play that Hovland could go off week of at 24 to 1 because I think he would really need to separate himself from like a Xander to pass a Xander who's also been great on the odds board and also deserves or also been great at Quail Hollow and also deserves mention from us. But I think 24 to 1, if I'm asking you week of the PGA over under, he's lower than 24 to 1 or higher than 24 to 1. Like I think that's the right number for Hovland at a major right now.
I would go what like when I say under, I say like a lower number, so like
Yes.
20.
Yeah.
I think 20.
Yeah.
If we expect him to bounce back and get back to what he was, which I don't see a reason why he wouldn't. Um, yeah, I think it's probably going to be 20 because he is a very popular. Everyone I think wants to be kind of like with Ludwig. I think they want to be on the one he wins, and I
Well,
think if he's showing a little bit of form, he will get steam and get bet down. Probably closer to that number is my guess.
that's what I was going to ask you, just in a vacuum, because we didn't really talk about him at the Masters, which we probably should have. But forget numbers. Who are you higher on in 2024? Like, who do you think's more likely to win a major in 2024, Hovland or Ludwig? Because Ludwig's now passed him on the odds board.
I mean, if you're projecting, I think we will Hovland. I think he's more experienced. He's got more under his belt, and I think I do think that short game. I think he's going to fix it this year, and
Yeah.
I think he's going to rebound in a big way. And I think he's more like I think could be eating my words. I think if you put a gun in my head, Ludwig wins a major or Hovland wins a major this year. I think I'm gonna go Hovland.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Is the only thing I would say about Ludwig, and I probably should have mentioned this when we were talking about Augusta in terms of breaking trends. Do you know that Ludwig last year as a debutant led the Masters in putting? Um,
Hmm.
without ever seeing those greens in the past. Now, I watched Ludwig on Wednesday afternoon play a 9 hole practice round with Rory McIlroy, where Rory was literally like placing balls in different spots of the greens in Augusta and really teaching Ludwig how to play that golf course. But I mean, you talk about what is the thing that we always talk about at Augusta is it's not about how good of a putter you are. It's about how much experience you have on these greens, because they're greens that can take years for certain people to figure out. I think for Ludwig to show up at Augusta National on his first appearance and lead the field in putting, and then roll into Pinehurst and lead the field in ball striking for the first 2 days, I think he probably deserves more time from us in these early majors previews. You're right. I'm probably not going to pick him to win a major next year, just because there's only 4 of them, and I you just got to get your guys in. But gosh, I mean, this might be my favorite one for Ludwig. I think.
Well, because of how good of a driver he is, probably.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
I think the one knock.
the other cases would be Augusta. I think we maybe see a bit of regression at Augusta from Ludwig next year.
Mhm.
Um, and then so do you like Oakmont for Ludwig more than you like Quail Hall for Ludwig?
You know, honestly, I haven't done as much digging into Oakmont as
Yeah.
I have the first two, so my opinion is still pending on it. I mean, I would agree with you that you know, this is a great golf course for Ludwig. If we're talking about guys who hit it really far or elite drivers, great long iron players, I mean, he probably has a little bit room to improve in that area. Like he's good, but he's not like I would say elite in that category. Um,
In long iron play.
and long iron play.
He's,
Sure, yeah,
yeah.
he's good. He's very good. But, um, but like you think some of the well, I won't make that take. Um,
Now you have to.
no, because
No
it's
take
not.
is out of
No,
bounds.
because it's incorrect. It's an
Okay.
incorrect take.
Okay.
It's actually a take that I think Brian Kirshner had, and I think it's
Okay. Well, now
incorrect.
you have to say it. Throw Brian under the bus.
So Brian has always said with Ludwig that he's only good at golf courses with a lot of like short irons, which
Not a
Augusta like that.
not a good take.
I don't know. So I don't know.
He also just finished second at Castle Pines, which is pretty long iron intensive. Fifth
oh,
at the Memorial, which is pretty
yeah. I
long
mean,
iron
well, that's
intensive.
also at altitude. Like they're hitting 8 irons from 200 yards. Like
I
that's
I, I
that's
hear you, but
that's something you.
fifth at the Memorial,
Yes, that's more
second
longer iron. Yeah,
second at Augusta. You know
yeah.
what's interesting?
So
He didn't play the Wells Fargo last year,
well,
so
because I think he was injured.
yeah, so
Yeah,
he's never played this golf course before, and
he
so
never played Augusta.
he never played Augusta.
Yeah.
Never played
So,
Augusta.
look, I mean, like guys like Rory, Xander, Ludwig, Bryson, Brooks, like if we're gonna be going in like saying, okay, the big brawny, big driver guys, like yeah, he's on the list to win a PGA, and I mean, it's just I'm looking at the 15 to 1. And I think that number will well,
I think it'll get higher.
yeah. I guess I don't have an appetite to really I'm not in love betting it right now because
Yeah,
it's 15. I think there's a chance it goes, maybe has a little bit of a sophomore slump early in the season. Maybe it gets over, to closer to 20 or so.
yeah. Anybody, because I do think that there's a better case at this event to go farther down the board. So
Yes.
I would be less likely to shoot you down in flames, as my friend Steve Bamford said about taking some shots on longer odds guys. I think everybody forgets about how far the middle tier can drift at majors week of if they're not playing well. So like for example, if Jason Day or Max Homa or Sung J M are not in good form, okay, and we've seen them enter 2024 majors not in good form, they will be 100 to 1 at a major. They will be. That those numbers drift the week of majors because we get to these majors and it's like, whoa, Max Homa 80 to 1. I'm still going to bet the guys that are playing good golf to win a major championship and not bet Max Homa at 80 to 1, right? So, you know, some of these numbers like Homa's 75 to 1 right now. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. He's won at Quail Hollow before. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he'll get necessarily either he's like playing great and he's 30 to 1, or, he's 80 to 1.
Well, I mean, Max is someone I highlighted here because you're right. The 75 to 1,
I
I think
highlighted
is
him too, Steve.
surprising.
I'm worried how aligned we are.
So, well, I'm going to say a negative though about Homa, but, because it makes sense that, that's a good, easy first click. Won at Quail Hollow before. He showed a little bit at the President's Cup. Like his record didn't really quite reflect it, but Brian Harmon really was terrible that week, and he played a lot better than I think what his record showed. And, it's only a year ago where I think he stepped onto the tee on 12 on Sunday. I think he was tied for the lead or
Yeah.
one of the lead. Like there was momentum for him, and then
You had that can't lay thing in a major that we would
yep,
be hoping for, right? You had that reps, and he's been pretty eloquent about talking about what it was like being in that experience about Augusta, and he said all the right things that a golf psychologist would tell you to say about how you draw all of the positives from that experience, right? That would
right.
leave
I
you feeling optimistic about his
Yeah.
chances in the future.
So my take though is Homa cooked at this point? Because look, like I mean, like his on paper, like with his peers around him, he is very deficient. Even like going past like 90 to 1 or so. There's guys the last 50 rounds who have been much better than Homa. The driving has really gone downhill for Homa as far as
Mhm.
both distance and strokes gained, even accuracy too. Like He's losing pretty much across the board there. The iron play has gotten worse. He's not the youngest guy. He's over 30. This was also somebody, too, that once, I mean, talented amateur career, but he washed out of the PGA Tour once, had to go back down to the Corn Ferry, came back. So you question whether is this really an elite talent? He's had a good 4, 5, 6 years now, but like, is the window maybe closed on Max Homa now? So there's that potential too. Like maybe
Mhm.
75 actually is his high point this year. What if he comes out just complete dog shit? Same type of form he showed last year. He's going definitely past 100 to 1, 125 to 1 at that point.
Agreed. Agreed.
So I mean, a guy like, but I can understand though if you are still high on Homa and you still can remember that at his best, this is a good golf course for him. If you have faith that kind of like with Hovland, if he can fit the short game with Homa, I think he's got to fix his driving. That's somebody you maybe want to bet right now, and maybe he goes and wins Riviera or he wins Phoenix or something like that. And now all of a sudden he's back to being 35, 40, or even 30 to 1. Um, Here's a name. I
Okay.
mean, we talk about Jason Day doing really good. Like really good at this golf course. And actually, one of the stark memory.
That was the other name I circled.
Well, I
We
didn't.
we 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 didn't compare notes. I mean, these aren't like
Well,
Jason Day has been the second best player at Quail Hollow outside of Rory McIlroy. So it's not like I would expect both of us to come to some of the same conclusions on some of these guys.
so Jason Day is not somebody I'm interested in at
Okay.
this time.
Well, I also don't
I
think
don't think.
70 to 1's a good number.
No, I don't think it.
Like I have Jason Day has made me a lot of money at major championships in DFS.
Yeah.
I just I think regardless of form, particularly at open championships, Jason Day is always viable to randomly top 10 in major. And he did so, I think, out of the blue last year at the open championship. I
Yeah.
don't think 70 to 1 is that good of a number on Jason Day because even with the course history, if he's not playing good golf, I could see him going 100.
Yeah. I guess why I bring up Jason Day is like profile. Like, what if we think about Jason Day? Like, long off the tee, really sporadic with the irons, comes and goes. Great short game, great putter though
Great
throughout his
putter.
career. The whole
Yeah.
reason why he won Whistling Straits in 2015 was so the iron play really started. It started to peak, and that's why he had that great run from 15 to 16, even bleeding into like 18 or so. So we think about types of guys like that have length, streaky irons, really good short game putting though. I mean, I
Wyndham.
don't think these numbers are all that great though, but like that kind of says Sam Burns
I thought you were
possibly.
going to go Wyndham.
Well, Wyndham is another one. I mean, that's
Yeah.
very low hanging fruit, but like Sam Burns, we've been kind of waiting for him to show up in majors. He kind of did a little bit at the Open. He was top 10 heading in.
Uh-huh.
Now he had a horrific Sunday, but he's been kind of hanging a little bit up towards the top of the leaderboard.
He was good at Pinehurst too. Remember,
Was.
he was my long shot pick at Pinehurst
Hmm.
heading in when we did this last year and he played well at Pinehurst.
Yep. So, guy with length, guy that can be really streaky with the irons, good putter though. That could work here, or Wyndham Clark. I mean, what if it's just staring us in place? What if this is just another slightly harder Wells Fargo? And he already won that golf course. And, I mean, the long iron play is, well, not very great on paper with him, but he can be streaky with it. What if that's just another profile? I don't think the numbers are all that good. I think Wyndham, I probably would expect probably if he dips around 70, 80, I probably would take a stab at him. He
Yeah.
probably is a one major guy, but that's if you're looking for just if you are really in just the bomber narrative, guys that can have a good short game. Yeah, I mean like that type of player. Like he's one of the few in this field that has that fifth gear off the tee
Mm-hmm.
to be able to win this thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like those types of guys in the mid tier are were guys I highlighted as far as I don't think the number is all that good right now. I like you said, week of a lot of these guys drift. But those types of players, I probably could win a Quail Hollow because they do have that skill set.
Mm-hmm. I was surprised at how poor Finau has been at Quail Hollow because his skill set makes a lot of sense to me at Quail Hollow. And again, we saw him hang really tough. at Pinehurst. I mean, that was a really impressive performance from Finau at Pinehurst, where he really didn't wilt. I mean, he just went out there and got beat. Um, some of the guys that have been really good at Quail Hollow in the past, Sung Jae, 90 to 1, whatever. Fleetwood's been really good at Quail Hollow, 55 to 1.
Mhm.
Probably not piquing my interest, but this is probably the most likely major championship that if you are saying to yourself, okay, I just think that Austin Eckroat is really freaking good. I just think that Akshay Bhatia is really freaking good. I just think that Nick Dunlop or Davis Thompson is really freaking good. This is probably one to bet them at. This is probably the one to bet them at, right? I just think that Cam Davis, 200 to 1, is really freaking good at golf. Probably
Mm.
bet them at this one, right? I mean, I don't get why Nick Dunlop is 200 to 1, who's a Southeastern guy. I don't get, I mean, I get it's a smaller field, but Nick Dunlop 200 to 1 here, but 100 to 1 at the Masters. Mm,
Yeah. I would agree with you. Like some other names to throw in there, like a Nikolai Højgaard. Like
sure.
he held the lead alone on Saturday at Augusta and then completely threw up all over himself. But that is a guy with a very high ceiling. Did very well at Torrey Pines. There's not a ton of difference, I feel like, between Torrey Pines and really this
No,
place. Cam Davis, though, that's the interesting one because he's been around for a while now. Is Cam Davis just is he just a finished product at this point? He kind of is what he is.
I don't
Like
know
like
if
he
there's
like he's
a, yeah.
like where like is does he really have the ceiling that we want him to have? Like I want him to have that ceiling. I think he has all the tools to be an elite top 20 player on the PGA Tour.
Hmm.
And he just goes out and wins Rocket Mortgage, or he just
Yeah.
plays well at Harbour Town. Like he's
Yeah.
got that good finish at Oak Hill, which is probably something that would
Yeah.
translate well here.
Hmm.
You wonder though, like I don't hate the pick because he is highlighted here. It just you wonder like is he kind of just is what he is at this point? And
I think he has the potential to be like a 4 day microwave guy where he's in the final group of a major.
hmm,
Um, I do think he can channel that, but I don't think that he'll ever be a consistent week to week top 20 guy. I mean, just on that same narrative, we're getting into Kyle territory now, but like Torrey Pines, long irons, power off the tee. Jake Knapp is 280 to 1. Kurt Kitty,
stop it.
Kurt, Kurt,
Jake Knapp is
Kurt
rich man's
Kittyama,
camp. Jake
Kurt
Knapp is rich man.
Kittyama.
Jake
Yeah.
Knapp is rich man's Cam Champ. He
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Kurt
yeah.
Kittyama's 280 to 1. He finished top five at Oak Hill and one at Bay Hill. So kind of the distance and long irons. Kurt Kittyama almost 300 to 1. Taylor Pendrith almost 300 to 1.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean those would be the guys.
Yep, I would agree with that. I mean, great. I can't believe I'm saying this. Graceman's got a lot of pop off the tee. Like his profile is basically Taylor Moore. So
Mm-hmm.
like just pop off the tee and a lot of putting. And like I mean his irons are complete dog shit, but what if he gets hot with those, coming in? I mean, he's
These are
another one of these guys that like he has that skill set.
yeah.
So,
They're
he's
fun to
sitting
talk.
300 to
They're
1.
fun to talk about,
Right.
and these names catch our attention because they have way better course fits than some of the guys in their price range. But
Mm.
um, ultimately, I think it's just situations where you're gonna have Jake Knapp 280 to 1, and he's gonna go off tournament week maybe 120 and not win. I mean that's kind of what we're
If
dealing with
Jake
here
Knapp wins a PGA, I might retire,
from
to be
golf.
completely
Yeah,
honest. Yeah.
yeah. So all right, you going Bryson?
I am. That's my pick. I mean, the Masters pick is just all right. Well, who's going to be playing the best? This one, I have serious conviction, and I might
You
bet
may
that
bet it.
24.
Yeah, it's not
I think I
bad. It's not
probably
a bad
will.
number.
I don't see a lot of downside in that, unless he gets injured. Which he could. I don't see a lot of downside in just betting Bryson right now, and I feel pretty strong conviction about that.
I'm not. you're not going to get any pushback from me.
Okay.
24 to 1 surprised me. I thought that was, I think there is a pretty high likelihood that that number gets lower. I don't think much needs to happen with Bryson for that number to get a little bit lower. Um, since you're not letting me bet Rory, um, I guess for sake of differentiation, I guess I'll go Hovland by default. I picked him last year and he almost won.
Okay.
Bryson,
I don't
yeah, Bryson and Hovland were my picks last year, and I'm kind of like running it back.
I
I,
don't see a reason why you wouldn't. I mean, if it's basically
yeah,
going to be a more difficult Valhalla, like we could be getting exactly what we got last year as far as like that type of leaderboard. So
I
yeah, just run it
agree.
back.
I agree. All right, Steve. We will reconvene next week to talk about Oakmont and Portrush, right? Are you going to
Yes, we will.
Portrush?
Hmm.
Are you free on could you I'm gonna be traveling. I don't get back until Sunday evening. Could you do Monday?
Yeah, Monday actually probably would work better. I need a little bit more time to do
Me too.
Oakmont and Portrush. There's more to
I,
talk about.
I'm gonna do Oakmont and Portrush on the planes
Okay.
on my plane ride. So anything else? Anything you want to so what's your we're gonna do our podcast next week and then I'm gonna try and get the team together to do a major draft, um,
Hmm.
maybe in mid-December, which will maybe be like one of our first videos on the YouTube channel. And I will post all of these to the YouTube channel as well as some of our first videos just to get some YouTube history in there for us so people aren't going with a totally blank slate on January 1st. But this will be up on the podcast feed tomorrow. Anything else you're excited about in the next month?
I mean,
January can't come soon enough, man. I'm so excited. I'm chopping at the bit. I know you've seen how hard I've worked at this. I know you've worked hard as well, and been incredibly helpful in the process of getting this up and running. So I'm pretty fired up.
yeah, I am too. I am very excited to start the podcast again. Boston Capper actually just texted me the other night saying he can't wait to shoot the shit about golf again on
Yeah.
a podcast for him because we text still, we still talk, we send each other football bets and everything, but like nothing beats coming on the mic, seeing him and the video screen, and seeing his reactions when I just shit on a pick of his. It's priceless, and I'm looking forward to getting back and doing it under the umbrella of Inside Sports too. It is an honor that you went out and got us to come over. Obviously, we have had a great relationship doing podcasts together for a bunch of years now, and it
Although
is
you refuse to play golf with me, which I'm starting to take personally. I don't know how
so.
many times I have to invite you to a top 40 golf course in America and you just turn me down.
Listen,
That's 10 minutes away from your house.
life has been very complicated, either with back injuries a couple of years ago, or just with some things with my day job this summer that completely. I played 9 rounds of golf this year, and I
Look
didn't
at
play it
you.
all between June 1st and late September because my summer got completely wrecked with some things going on with the other day job there. But no, next summer, book it. I will
We'll
be
do it.
available.
We'll do it.
Yeah.
Awesome, Steve. Well, I will talk to you next week. Have a great week, my friend.
All right.